So hello everyone, this is Michael Butterman, music director of the Boulder Philharmonic Orchestra, and I am so pleased today to be joined by Bob New, who is the stage director with whom we've collaborated a couple of times at the Boulder Phil on
Mhm.
productions that were collaborations with Central City Opera. We did a production of St. Matthew Passion of Johann Sebastian Bach in 2016. Also the next year, or no, 2 years later, 2018,
Right.
a semi-staged version of West Side Story of Bernstein, two very different works, to be sure,
Indeed.
but both of them among the most well received of any of the productions that we've presented at the Boulder Phil. And in particular, the St. Matthew Passion was just such an emotional experience for, I think, everybody who was involved in it. We have now shared with our audience two of the three greatest moments, I think, in that piece, Erbarme dich aus Liebe. And today we're going to talk in particular about the aria that the bass sings right toward the end of the work, Mache dich, Herze, rein. But before we do that, I want to just maybe have a moment to ask you, Bob, to
Mhm.
to talk a little bit about your approach to staging something like this. This is a piece that is, so it's not an opera,
Right.
but on the other hand, even though has usually been presented in oratorio fashion or concert fashion, there is so much drama in this
Oh.
story, and also in the way that Bach has written the piece, that
Mhm.
it almost has an implied staging, even if one isn't doing it. So, how did you approach this task?
Well, let me say, when I was first asked to do it, I was absolutely terrified. I mean, the fact that this is one of the great works of Western culture, I mean, it's one of the great, great masterpieces, is so intimidating. And as you said, it's not usually staged. But the more I worked on it, the more I've come to decide for sure that, Bach, of course, was a church musician. He didn't have the opportunities to write operas, but I think this is an opera. I mean, this is his opera almost, because it is, as you said, it tells a very clear story. It has very clear characterizations. The arias give such clear characters to these singers. It's just amazing. And when I sort of then delved into it and discovered the conversational aspect of it, there are two choruses, there are two orchestras. It feels like there's a lot of talking back and forth. And as a director, my starting point is always the text, to see what the text says and then go from there. So the more I realized that the text moves in a linear story, the easier it sort of became to figure out ways to kind of dramatically tell the story. I knew that it couldn't be or shouldn't be very literal. We didn't need to see, in my opinion, the characters in biblical costumes, as it were, or to literally see Jesus on a cross. I mean, obviously the audience knows the story and their imagination can fill in the blanks. So we wanted to do something that was suggestive, that gave some specificity to the text, but that also involved everybody on stage as a part of this, meaning that the orchestra is an active part. The choruses do more than just stand up and sing their chorales. They're active people, individuals in this very dramatic story. So putting all that together, it started to kind of make sense of how to visually kind of add an element to this to tell the story.
And the two arias that we have already seen, by the way, involve musicians from the orchestra coming
Mhm.
down stage, not staying separate from the action, but kind of really
Right.
joining joining their humanity to that of the characters, as it were.
Precisely. I mean, those pieces are dialogues between the singers and with commentary from the instrumentalists. And it just, for me, was a way to make sure that idea came across visually to the audience, that we were involving the instrumentalists. I think psychologically, for the orchestras that I've worked with doing this, I wanted them to feel, the individual musicians to feel, that they were more than just, accompaniment, that they had a very active role. And I try to talk to each of these groups when I'm doing this project with them to explain this, that I hope that they'll listen actively and not be passive and be part of the storytelling. So that was a way that kind of made that visually enhanced.
Yes, and I think that has been the impact in the two places that you and I have done this piece together. That everybody does feel that this is something that really totally enveloping of every performer, and it really well that in turn brings the viewer or the audience into the experience
Exactly.
in a very personal way. And of course, so much of this is kind of a going back and forth between the story itself, in which there are literal characters as Judas and Pontius Pilate and so on, and also sort of a reflection on the text from the standpoint of whatever human being is experiencing this at whatever time.
Right.
These arias mostly are not characters. Sometimes they are, but oftentimes they are just a human response emotionally to what has just been
Well,
described in the text.
but the thing with actors are great actors because they know how to react specifically, and they know how to deliver text in a specific way as opposed to a general way. And I think with pieces like this, that we've heard this text and we've heard these stories so often, we as listeners can oftentimes not have a personal reaction anymore. We kind of turn that off because we know the arc of the story and we feel the appropriate things, but not in a personal, specific way. And this piece, I think what we did with the piece helped so much for listeners to rehear the text and to re-examine kind of their connection to what each of these characters are talking about. Because people are expressing their love for Jesus, their doubt, their worries about themselves, their guilt sometimes if they're part of betrayal. So there are all kinds of emotions going on that I think it's easy to maybe gloss over, for lack of a better way to say it.
Right. This does allow you to experience a familiar story anew, and with, I think, just much, much deeper and heightened a sense of personalization and reality somehow. So let's talk in particular about this aria that the bass soloist sings. Now, this aria is it is a solo aria, but at the same time, you, in the way you staged it, made it something that was more about the entirety of that stage than it was just about him. So first of all, just set up what is happening in the story. At what point are we in the story when this aria happens, and what is the text getting across, and so on?
Yeah, well, we're in the story with right after Jesus has died. And leading up to this, we all know what happens, but dramatically, we've seen all these characters go through all the things I just talked about, the doubt and the despair, and I think the questioning of what the meaning of this death is and what it means for humanity and for them individually. So I felt that there was sort of a lot of almost confusion on the part of the characters leading up to this. And there's a lot of chaos because right after he dies, there's the section where the temple walls are rent and sort of kind of a quasi almost end of the world sort of thing. So where does that leave us? And you suddenly come to this aria, which is, oh my gosh, it's so sublime musically. There's just nothing like it. But it also, it's in B flat major, which is a very positive key. And, the text is the text has no action in it basically, except there was one line that stuck out for me, which is "Let Jesus in." He sort of ends each of his phrases, "My heart is open," but he's saying, "Let Jesus in." So I started thinking, is he talking to himself? Is he talking to the audience? Is he talking to everyone else on stage? And I think the answer is yes to all of those.
Right.
And from this point on, the rest of the piece, the solo quartet kind of work as a team. So after a lot of false starts, because this was something, I didn't know how to stage this piece at all. This aria is so great. But again, the text doesn't give you a lot of action to work with.
Right.
It gives you no action. And it's quite a long aria. And it has really about 4 or 5 lines of text that just repeats. So we tried this idea of having it be him, the bass being the first person who starts to understand the largeness of Jesus's death and what it means as far as saving humanity and saving individuals and their belief system and their faith. And he starts to spread this word to the rest of his colleagues on stage. And there's time in the piece where we can see that they at first don't want to hear it, or they don't believe it, or they just want to be private in their own grief, but he keeps insisting. And by the end, they're united in sort of looking at the world in a new, fresh way and being and having the right amount of being grateful, or having a sense of salvation. I mean, these all sound like such big abstract ideas, but for each kind of personal, for each person to his or her own way of accepting the next stages in their life based on what this death has meant to them. Whew, I'm sorry, that's very overblown.
Well, it well, it isn't though, because
well, no, I mean, it's such a profound piece, and I, and like I said, I was terrified about staging this in this way the very first time we did it because I think anything that is bigger than life, like this piece, everybody's a little afraid of, and you maybe don't want to break tradition. But at one point, we were working on it, and we kind of got through the whole concept, and we all looked around and realized we all had tears going down our face.
Yes, I was just going to to share that, because I think that we you and I've done it twice, and I've had that experience twice. But the first time that I ever saw you stage this was, I just remember, in a little rehearsal room in Boulder, and I don't even think I was conducting anything. I was just sort of sitting on a stool, just sort of watching it happen as our wonderful accompanist was playing. And but by the end of it, I don't think anybody said anything right after it finished. It was just this sort of moment, and I absolutely was crying. And then I looked up, and I that and I wasn't the only one. And that's when I realized this. This is, well, first of all, it is one of the greatest pieces of music just on its own. It is just it's uplifting, and it's beautiful and so on. But then to have this extra element of it's almost a benediction that's being bestowed on on humanity somehow by the realization that the bass.
I think about it now, and I still get choked up, and I get shivers. I mean, it helped that we had soloists that we were working with who were so wonderful and who were so open. And Ryan Custer, who is our baritone, was just so. He took any ideas that I had and really kind of ran with them and expanded them. And everybody was just completely open to trying some things. And, if we had had people who didn't think that way or weren't imaginative actors, it may have not been as effective. But yeah, it just was, the stars were aligned. And thank you, Bach. Oh my gosh.
Indeed. And there's one more thing. We have obviously the 4 aria soloists in this. Jesus, the character Jesus at this point is, as you say, has just died. But the evangelist, who is the narrator of the story, in the way that you have staged this, and I guess throughout, you have made him not just an impersonal conveyor of fact, but he too is experiencing these same emotions and the doubt and the confusion and so on. So you bring him into this as well as one more person who needs to be consoled at this point.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, it is an incredibly effective, I think, treatment of what is one of the the great achievements in this piece, which is in turn one of the great achievements of Western classical music, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely.
So with that kind of introduction, perhaps we should
let's do it again.
Indeed. Well, this is a piece that every time you do it, and I've been privileged to do it a number of times, you feel that this is it's just such an incredible privilege, a blessing. If you're a musician and you get to do this piece once, in a way, it sort of makes being a musician worthwhile somehow. So I'm grateful to you, to what you brought for what you brought to this, and to all of our singers and orchestra musicians as well, who just really invested themselves in
this. That's it. We had great musicians who were so a part of it, and the chorus was fantastic. And we should say too that we can't forget that our soloists all came memorized, which is unheard of in this piece. Right. And they all were just from the very start. I've done the piece now 3 times, and every time with different people. Everybody has come in so enthusiastic and so prepared. And that then allows us to do the work that we need to do to really kind of take it to this kind of theatrical level that we did. That, oh, please, Michael, let's do it again. We have to.
I,
Everybody's listening and they're like, oh, I missed it. I have to see it, or I forgot about that part. I want to see it again. So I know it's a small undertaking for any orchestra. So let's just kind of do it.
well, it's we will. We'll find a way. Yeah. We will. I can say that right now because it's.
There's always the St. John too.
There, yeah, he's got a couple of them.
That's right.
That's right. Both are miracles of composition. So, Bob, thank you so much for taking some time to share some thoughts with us. And we're going to now segue to the performance of Mache, dich, Herze, rein from 2016 in the St. Matthew Passion with the Boulder Philharmonic.
Great.
Herze